So hello everyone, thank you for joining today's presentation. This is the very first presentation that will be part of our Best Paper Award, and it will be done by Petr Váňa, whom you all know, I think. And it will be around 30 minutes, and you will have time to ask questions at the end. Of course, if there's something that you need to find out or understand better to move on, just go ask right away or use the chat. And we will just start. And thank you again, Peter, for preparing the presentation.
Thank you, Carolina. Once again, my name is Petr Váňa, and today I will present to you my journal paper called Optimal Solution of the Generalized Dubins Interval Problem. Some of you may be already familiar with this work because this is a journal version of formally published conference paper at RSS conference, which I will talk about later a little bit, but I would like to start with a motivation slide. So we live in a time when there are so many area vehicles, and on the left side you can see a classical Cessna, which is probably the most common general aviation aircraft. In the middle, there is an example of unmanned aerial vehicle, which we have here at our department. And on the right side, you can see maybe the future, which is flying cars, or alternatively, we can discuss about urban mobility. But why I selected these three pictures, the reason is that these vehicles are all fixed wings, which means that they can fly quite effectively, but to induce the lift on the wings necessary to fly, we need some minimum speed. And this condition limits us in the sense of trajectory planning. So all these vehicles has some kind of limited curvature. And that's what I'm studying. So if we say we have the simplest model, which is called Dubins vehicle, we are traveling in a plane with an heading angle, and the only constraint we have is the minimum turning radius. So if we want to visit multiple points, as you can see on the animation, the path will change once the radius is increased. The Dubins model is very commonly used because it's also simple to compute the path, the optimal path. And it was proven really early that there are only 6 possible maneuvers that can be optimal. You can see 2 examples on the left. The maneuvers can consist only from the circle and straight segments. And if there is a circle segment, this segment has exactly the minimum turning radius. But the complicated part is when the turning radius gets bigger, and you can see the solution may be pretty nasty. And the thing is that if the points are close enough, the cost function or distance function of the Dubins maneuver is quite complicated. So in general, we can talk about the Dubins distance function as a piecewise continuous function, and you can see it on the animation on the right. So I need to talk a little bit what you are seeing. So first of all, there is a distance called d, and this is a distance between the initial and final location. And this is multiplied by the minimum turning radius rho. And you can see that if the animation starts from the 0 distance, you will see a small blue part here, and there is the discontinuity that makes the function problematic. And once we get to distance 4 times the minimum turning radius, this part of the discontinuity just vanished. And from this distance, it's much easier, and we can use, let's say, convex optimization to solve a problem like these. So, and just to make sure, there are two axes, and this is the initial heading angle, and this is a terminal heading angle, which means we are just rotating the initial and final configuration. And on the right, a part of the animation, you can see the maneuver types. So these 6 maneuvers are possible when L is left turn, right turn, and straight segment. Okay, so now we know that the Dubins distance is quite a complicated function, and it's not that easy to work with that. So in literature, we can find very many approaches considering this problem, and considering 2 problems. As I taught, as the Dubins Touring problem, going through points with the given order, or Dubins traveling assessment problem when we have the minimum turning radius constraint, and also we don't know the sequence. The list here is just to say, just to tell that there exist many options how to tackle this issue. One is sampling based. If the points are far enough, we can utilize the convex optimization. But in general case, these algorithms don't provide any guarantee on the solution's quality. So this changed about year 2015, where the first paper solving so-called Dubins interval problem was published on arXiv. And here down on the left, you can see that Maniam published 2 journal versions in 2016 and 17, which were providing the first lower bound for these problems, and I will talk about it later. But to make sure this list is not complete, because I wouldn't be able to fit on this slide. So why I'm talking about Dubins interval problem? This problem formulation gives us a natural lower bound for various trajectory path planning problems with limited curvature. So here on the in the image, we can see that we don't have only the initial configuration and final configuration with the headings, but we also have a angular interval from which we can select the heading angle. And in this paper, the authors proved that there are only a limited number of maneuvers that can be optimal, and they also introduce conditions in which these maneuvers can be optimal. So this is a necessary conditions for each maneuver to be optimal at the specific case. So for example, this is the optimal solution, which gives also the lower bound for this kind of problem. But why I'm talking about this? The idea is that we have a set of locations, and we want to go through these locations using a vehicle with a limited turning radius. So having the Dubins interval problem, we can do one interesting thing. Instead of only sampling the heading angle in each location, instead we can divide the whole continuous space into angular intervals, and then compute, based on the Dubins interval problem, the lower bound between 2 pairs. And once we do that, we can find the shortest tour using the Dubins interval problem, and this gives us the lower bound for the whole problem, which is quite interesting. And here on the image, we can see that uniform sampling is not always the best possible. So we already improved this in one conference paper that we can let's say informally split the space to have a tight lower bound. The lower bound here is the red curve and the upper bound is the blue curve. So you can see that for such an instance, we're able to have the almost the same lower bound as the upper bound. So we are quite sure that we are close to the optimal solution. So this was some kind of introduction for giving you info what was done in the paper which I want to present. So one thing we can do with area vehicles is not to visit the location exactly, but rather allow some kind of distance. It can be a sensing radius, or depending on the task from which we can maybe collect the data or have a transmission to a base station. So the idea here is that using this sensing radius, we can have a shorter trajectory that capture all the data necessary. So it is not necessary to visit the location exactly anymore. And this kind of problem we call Dubins Touring Region Problem, which just mean we want to have a trajectory that intersects all the circular disks and also meet the minimum turning radius constraint. So what we wanted to do is to provide a similar lower bounds for this Turing problem through the regions. And since I was talking about Dubins interval problem, this paper extends this formulation and introduced so-called generalized Dubins interval problem. The generalization is in the fact that not only the heading angle is selected from the angular interval, like here, but also the location P1 can be selected from the given disk area P1. So this introduces more dimensions into the configuration space of the generalized Dubins interval problem. So it's also more challenging to be solved. And what we did in this paper was to find the optimal solution. Yes, you can say that this may be quite complicated, and that's why we first think about this problem and try to simplify the problem as much as possible. So what we did is we took the full problem, the generalized Dubins interval problem, where on both sides we have a disk-shaped region, and we converted to a version which we call one-side version, because the disk-shaped region is only on one side. So we are starting from a single point and going to the disk-shaped region. But the question is how to do that. And in the paper, we were able to prove that we can converge any kind of regions using a Minkowski sum to the one-side version with generated region. So these two problems are convertible. So once we know solution from one, we also know the solution for the second one. And once we have this transformation, I'm sorry, no, okay, I will continue. Once we know the transformation, we are able to say that we will be solving further only the one-side version. And Here you can see that we have identified several cases that we need to solve. These cases comes from the Dubins interval problem with all the constraints, but we don't have the two location exactly, but one location need to be selected from a disk-shaped region. By the way, we can use a different shape of the regions, but for simplicity and more readability, we just focused on disk shape region, but otherwise it would be also possible. So here, for example, we have a S-type. For each case, we prove some other conditions like, which is quite straightforward, because straight maneuver needs to go straight to the center of the disk shape region. But for the other cases, it may not be so straightforward. So for each case, we find the necessary conditions, and we also prove it. So for each case, we have a lemma and also a formal proof that proves that this maneuver, for example, for these maneuvers, we have some specific conditions. At the end, once we found these conditions, we were able to say that for these 6 cases on the left, we are for all of them able to find it by closed form expression, which is very good because any closed form expression can be, let's say, effectively computed. So it's really nice. And the only case on the right side needs to be solved using a convex optimization. But on the other hand, this convex optimization has only one free variable. So it converges in several iterations. So it's not a big deal. So after all, we are able to find the optimal solution for all these 7 cases. So it means we are able to find it for any generalized Dubins interval problem instance. And down right, you can see a small table of average computational time for these kind of problems. So the original Dubins maneuver between 2 configurations take a little bit more than half a microsecond to compute on a standard CPU like this notebook I'm presenting on. And Dubins interval problem, which I'm not author of, takes about 2.8, and our solution takes about 20.63 microseconds. So which is only about 22 times slower, which is quite fast. So we are able to very rapidly find the optimal solution for this kind of problem. And this helps us for solving bigger problems. So what is the bigger problem? So we have, in this case, 10 disks we want to visit using our curvature-constrained trajectory. And here, what can you see? There are so many lines. So first of all, the red lines, a red path, because all the red and blue lines are Dubins path. The red path represents the lower bound, and the blue path represents the upper bound. So the blue is a feasible solution, the best we currently have, and the red line is a lower bound that can be proved. And in addition, we have green disks. And what it means, I will move a little bit. So the green disks, sorry, are at the boundary of the yellow disk shape regions, which means that we are sampling, let's say sampling or dividing the space only on the boundary of the region. And the idea is that we don't have to use the whole region, because once the trajectory visits the region, it will need intersects the boundary. So we are looking only for the boundary. And if you take care, you can see also yellow lines, which represents the angular intervals. So more lines means more densely sampled area. And I will go back a little bit. So here we can say we can see a we call it resolution, which means that we have a 4 green disk on the boundary, and also we have a 4 the heading angle is split to 4 intervals. And once the resolution is increased, you can see the red and blue colored lines are going together, and they are closer and closer. And once we get resolution about 256, it's also the same, almost the same. So after these kind of steps, after computation for 30 seconds, we can say the gap is only 1.3%, and we can continue. So this is what is the main benefit of the generalized Dubins interval problem. For the first time, we are able to have a tight lower bound for the Dubins Touring region problem. And I want to mention that you can see here the discontinuity of the lower bound. So we have a lower bound, and we also able to, let's say, visualize the lower bound, because for many problems, the lower bound cannot be visualized so easily. But yes, that's it. And I want to also summarize the results in more in some plots. So for example, I was talking about the 10 regions, and this specific instance is also in the left plot. So you can see that this is the resolution, and this is the upper bound and lower bound. And once the resolution is higher, the both bounds converges together to the optimal solution quite rapidly. And this is the relative length. And on the other axis, you can see the computational time. And since the axis is both the resolution and computation time is logarithmic, you can see that in logarithmic scale, the computational time grows approximately linearly. So this is very interesting. And what we also found, that the algorithm scales linearly with the number of regions. So here we have an example, the blue line for 10 regions as in the demonstration. And once we go for multiple regions like 100 here, it just moves on the logarithmic scale, but only by a factor of 10. So we can say that the approximated computational complexity is linear to the number of regions, which may be quite surprising. So if I may start to concluding, all the source codes used for both the presentation and for all the computation and paper are open source at GitHub. And you can see also the animation on the main page. And the main benefit, just to summarize, of this paper is that we are for the first time able to provide a tight lower bound for curvature-constrained trajectory planning with region disk areas. So, just final slide, I want to also summarize the history of the paper, because it's quite long, to be honest. The first we started with the paper where the Maniam et al. Published the Dubins interval problem. It was in 2015 on Archive, and in 2017 there were the journal version. So we found it quite recently, quite fast. So we started somewhere between 2015 and 16 working on this, and we had some first ideas. To be honest, my supervisor was a little bit skeptical at the first place, but after a while, we found that this problem can be solved optimally. And during the year 2016, I was working on lemmas, proofs, and implementation. And in January 2017, we first submitted this paper to RSS conference, which was at the time the only A-star conference at robotics. And by May 2018, I found in the email that this paper was nominated for the best student paper. I remember quite well because during that time I was with Tomáš Krajník at traveling to Accra to Australia to present another papers. But afterwards, it was presented in 2018, and unfortunately, this paper didn't won the best paper award. There were 3 papers, but on the other hand, it was invited to a special issue in our journal, which is Q1. And it took almost 2 more years to make it done. So it was finally published in September 2012. So thank you for your attention, and I will wait for your question because I hope there will be some. Thank you.